Oh, wow. Now that is a welcome. Thank you very much to the 92nd Street Y, everyone at home, and also all of you. It's a cold Wednesday night. You could be anywhere, but you're here with us. So thank you very much. Let's give it up one more time. Thank you. But it's also a pleasure to be here with you, LaJune.
Same here.
Such a magnificent career, so mission-oriented and mission-driven. But I want to start off by asking you something I think we should get more comfortable asking.
Okay.
How are you doing and feeling in this moment?
That's an interesting question. I am feeling driven. I'm feeling confident in the work that we are doing at the Kellogg Foundation and the journey that I've taken. And I continue to see the pathway forward. So I am confident.
Well, that's, first of all, to be confident and have clarity, because as someone who operates in this space, I find myself not unmoored at all, but in this weird place of a dissonance, like trying to pretend reality isn't really a reality, trying to root myself and continue doing the work so that you're able to, harness the power of clarity and confidence. I think is needed in this moment.
Yeah, we've been doing this work for almost 100 years, and our mission has been extremely focused, improving the lives of the most vulnerable children around the world. We haven't pivoted at all from that North Star for us, and the work that we do around healing and racial equity is part of the work to improve the lives of children, is about all children. And I'm very confident that that is our mission, it's our DNA. This isn't anything we just decided to do. It's been decades, and I feel very confident that this work is needed and important now more than ever.
And you didn't just drop out of the sky with a specter in your hand doing this work.
No.
If anyone spends any time with your book, one thing they'll learn very quickly: you're from Detroit.
Yes.
Detroit is almost like Philly or New York. It's like if you're from Detroit, they're proud people.
Absolutely.
Talk to us about how growing up in Detroit shaped not just you as a person, but also in this movement you're a part of now.
Yeah. It was Detroit. It's the fact that many people in Detroit migrated north from the South, and they were already determined and came with a purpose, as my parents did. My father left Clarksdale, Mississippi to go for employment opportunities in Detroit in the auto industry. So there was a determination, I think, from people in Detroit. And of course, we had the Motown sound and all of the energy and the pride of what was happening in Detroit. It was an innovative place. And on top of that, I'm number 9 of 10 children, so I had a lot of internal pressure as well. My family, believed in striving for the best, and I had that kind of influence, not only in my family, but my community, and, it continued into my profession. Yeah. So, yeah, people in Detroit don't play.
Clearly they don't play, clearly. Now, one thing about Detroit, for those of us who aren't from Detroit, but you come to realize it's a very black city, a very beautiful city, a city with as much promise as it is with problems. Yes. And you write about this experiment of Detroit. Talk to us about what that means.
Yeah, and Detroit has gone through what I call phases. Detroit is different today than it was when I grew up in the 60s, than it was in the 80s or 90s. And all of it is part of the story. But the important thing about Detroit is when I talk about innovation, it was a place. And when I grew up, my neighborhood was a very middle class, diverse neighborhood. people in my neighborhood, they were teachers, and they worked in the auto industry. They were professionals and, laborers. And they all lived together in this very cohesive community. And so, when I think about, it was funny, I was talking to my son the other day, and he said, you wrote about a community that I didn't see, because he's a 90s child. And we know what happened to Detroit as, policies drove people out. I talk about white flight in the book, and how, I lost what I considered to be my best friend, who was the white young lady, the young girl that lived next door. But policies changed, and their family was able to leave and move to a better neighborhood, and we stayed. And people like us stayed, and Detroit became, 98% black. It wasn't because of happenstance. It was because of policies. It was because of the ways that people were driven out and the lack of investment in Detroit. Detroit went from a great city to one that was so disinvested from an education standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And, that matters. And this whole conversation about how we heal and respect everyone's humanity is about recognizing the difference between our humanity and our own internal drive and the systems and structures that either allow that to flourish or cut that off. And that's what we all have to grow empathetic about, so that we can all then help people move forward in the future.
Do you get to the point where you are now with the work and with the book, How We Heal, without experiencing those early pangs in Detroit? Do we have, LeJune now without that little girl LeJune, and Jennifer, the little white girl who moved away? Do we get you now without that?
Not at all. It is, and that's what healing is about. It's about our stories. It's about our background and how we validate and affirm ourselves, no matter what that story is. And healing, the work, is about affirming one another's humanity. And the beginning of it is all about affirmation. It's about validating and finding connections amongst each other. And it's not blaming or shaming. It's not, trying to one up. It is about, where do we connect? How do we learn from each of our stories and use that for our growth, for all of our growth?
In this moment in particular, where so many of us are feeling shaken, and people are aching, and we're feeling the weight of the systems on our back,
Yes.
It feels like this book is not a response necessarily, but it's the book we need in this moment. And I say that not just because I'm up here with you,
And,
it's because
yeah.
it really is because we need some serious healing, because it's so clear how deep the wounds are.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what this book means and how to heal and what we're healing from.
And it's so funny, because we've needed this book many times before. A decade ago, we needed healing. And we thought it was then the most important thing. And today, yet still, it is so relevant. And we should even wonder why it remains so relevant as the way that people connect with one another. And we've lived in a very separated society in a lot of ways. Policies have separated us. The housing policy that allowed my best friend to move away was separation. And you've heard of the divide and conquer. I think the opposite of that is how we pull everyone back together, and through our own differences and our shared understanding, we can then all connect with one another and grow opportunities for everyone. So, yes, this is a moment. There will be others. We've seen historical patterns of when people make strides, then there's backlash, and there's an attack against that success, and then we see how people continue to push and move forward. So, in this moment, like others, the answer is, how do we connect and validate one another in a way that is about our humanity, and keeping that the center, and building empathy so that we can use that shared understanding to move forward. And, this is one of those moments, and we have to do the hard work. I always say healing is the hard work, because people, when you've been separated from someone and you don't know, the history or the story, there's an uncomfortableness there, and people shy away from that. And these are moments when you need to lean into that. So this is a time where we need to meet new people, learn new stories, develop empathy for one another, so that we have the kind of humanity and the connective tissue to think about, how do I support you and you support me?
Part of that idea that I've always liked, and I've heard you say it and I've read it, is that it's not the soft stuff.
Yeah.
Racial healing is not the soft, it's the hard stuff.
It is the most difficult.
But in a moment where people are fatigued and divided, how do you convince people that this hard work is not just necessary, but not mandatory, but we have to do something?
We do. And for me, you don't talk about it and try to convince someone, you just do it. So if I were encountering any of you, this is a moment to just take a little bit of a pause and say, so where your name come from, Trymaine? That's an interesting name. How'd you get that name? And what I find is people immediately light up.
You almost got me there. I was like, well, it
works. I don't know if we have time for you to tell it, but
it works, people. It works.
But yes, the first part of this work is drawing people inward, because a lot of this work is inward, and you would be amazed at how many people are even struggling with their own identity, and giving people a space to flourish within themselves first, and not to feel like they're about to have a debate with someone that they don't know. So I believe that the methodology of healing is very specific, and it comes from indigenous roots. Our native people use these practices to build community. And it is about our shared community and our shared faith. So when you stick to the purpose of the conversation and the dialogue and the methodology, it does always lead to a different exchange that is more humane, that allows us to take some time and space to get to know one another. And then when you got to do the real hard work, you have some currency with that person to have those more difficult conversations.
June, I've been guilty of this, where I hear racial healing and it seems amorphous, or it seems like something that black folks, we have to bear again because we've experienced it. It's almost like slavery being black history.
Right.
That's white history. Black history is how we responded to it and how we survived it.
Right.
And so I wonder, from your healing work in practice, what does it actually look like? And can you give examples of where you've seen it work in diverse communities?
Yeah, and so it's interesting that a lot of people really don't understand what it means. And like I said, it can be more simple than it sounds. But for example, I'll give you a few examples. The one that I like to tell a lot is the work that we've been doing with the GU 272, if you remember, the descendants of the slaves that were sold to build Georgetown University. And if you go deep into that history, the Jesuit institution sold slaves to build many institutions, and it was a practice. And I was contacted because after it became part of the press, one of the descendants wanted to address this with our healing framework. So it was a former trustee of the Kellogg Foundation, and he said if there was any place that healing needed to work, it was healing the space between the descendants of the slaves and the Jesuit order. So he called and said, will you support us in this healing framework? And we did that. So we supported the healing conversations between the Jesuits and the descendants. And it wasn't over, I mean, they didn't walk up and say hi and start hugging, It was a process. But we stuck to the healing methodology, and we provided facilitators for that conversation who were steeped in the practice and the methodology. And it was a process, and I do want to say this is a process, and it started with first the descendants wanting to heal amongst themselves. So to your point of, how do we enter this space? We have a lot of baggage. We have different responses. So, some of the descendants wanted X, the others wanted Y. So there was a healing process even within that group that later then extended, and there were these cascading circles of dialogue. And at the end of the day, now we have a foundation that's called the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. The board members are Jesuits and descendants, and myself, I am on the board. But through this process, this foundation now has resources, some of which were given by the Jesuit order. And now the focus of this institution is to educate those who were descendants and yet not given opportunities for education, for institutions of great education that their ancestors built. So, looking at that lineage and thinking through, how do we give back those opportunities? How do we begin to build community in this space? And it's working. It's been a great journey, and I was fortunate to be able to sit and be a part of those healing conversations. And again, that's why I say, I know this works. I've seen it work. I've seen it work many times. I've seen it work there. I've seen it work in communities. And I know what we don't have is shared space and safe spaces where we can do more of this. And that's what we're trying to create in our work.
When I hear about these healing circles where folks from different sides are coming together to have conversations, how rare that is that we sit down with people, especially in certain communities, that aren't like us, of a different race, of a different religion. It's still rare. And there are communities to this day where Georgetown is a very specific space, but there are communities where the descendants of enslavers and enslaved live in proximity now, and there's that tension.
Exactly.
How do we take that to those spaces?
Mm-hmm. And we do. We actually, as part of our work, we funded 14 communities. And one community, for example, happened to be Buffalo. And we actually funded the community before the shooting at the grocery store. But we were working in Buffalo because the business community came together and said, we haven't done right by the people of Buffalo. We want to create a table where we can work on creating opportunities. And so they were doing work, but wanted to bring the healing process into that space. So you had corporate executives, you had the nonprofit sector, and you had citizens who wanted to talk about why haven't people in Buffalo had an opportunity. And they ended up creating a roadmap, a one-stop space for young men to come and find employment opportunities, entrepreneurship, etc. So we did all this work through our healing process, and years later, there was this shooting at the grocery store. And a lot of people wanted to know why that the community could wrap themselves around this incident in such productive ways. And what I was told is part of the reason why they were so cohesive in their response was because they had done all this healing work in the past. And one of the most important things they were saying they wanted was more healing practitioners, because that's what their community needed to work through this and to resolve this in a way that no more shooting or burning, or, you know, you don't destruct when you can create a space for healing where everyone can move forward in more productive ways.
You're publishing this book at a time where the pot is being stirred. The divisions are only getting deeper. The words that you write in the first 20 page are words that are appearing on Excel spreadsheets of words that you cannot say, right? The government has said,
Yeah.
you know, that if you use this word and women and race, your whole practice and book is about racial healing.
Yeah.
What?
But it's all races. We're not being specific to any one race. We all must heal. Every last one of us has in some way encountered the harm and the trauma of racism. And what this process is about is how we reconcile with all of that in our own mind and consciousness, so that we can connect with others and begin to walk together about creating space for our common humanity. So when I think about our work, I don't see anything in our work that is illegal. Our work is about everybody, and it's about bringing people together, not tearing people apart or not tearing people down. And that's what I believe our foundation has stood on from the very beginning.
Yet and still, it is still courageous what you
Exactly.
all are doing, because other people are running from it.
Exactly.
How did you come to deciding to actually write the book? Was there a seed amidst the storm where you said, this is important for me to stand on this now?
Well, the healing process is about storytelling. And again, I am committed to the process and the practice. So this is really a book of stories. It's a story of my journey and my life and what made me who I am, but it's the story of our work, and it makes it very consumable to hear those stories versus we believe in children and families and communities. You know, the stories really illuminate that in a way that you can't just, see in some of our copy. And it's also a story of how all that interconnected. And, between the stories of our grantees, the stories of our work, my own personal story, what you see, I think, is, the fabric of society, which is what our work is all about. So I think, to tell stories is a practice that we all should become very comfortable with, because that is the beginning of the process.
Now, writing a book and exposing yourself and being personal in this way is never easy. Right? Just the vulnerability. Is there a story in this book that was tough for you to tell?
There were many. And the reason why I say that is the most vulnerable part of writing a story is reflecting backwards and actually reliving these stories and these moments. And I shared when I told the story about my best friend that lived next door, and we would play together every day. I would dream about her and argue with her at night, and so we'd get up the next morning and play more. I hadn't realized until I started writing this book that I hadn't really overcome that trauma. That was trauma in my life, and I hadn't reconciled that and processed that fully. So, going back over these moments and having time to really reflect, there's a lot of vulnerability there. Someone said to me, wow, your book was great. You were so brave. And at that moment, I was like, uh-oh. Because there is a lot of vulnerability in there. And, at the end of the day, we're all human. And they're human stories, and people go through stuff. And I have, as well as everyone else. And so I think part of it is just to make it human.
And part of this is your journey, and all of us are on this continuum, searching for more. And I wonder how your sense of healing has evolved over the years.
Yeah, it's been a more inward body of work for me, and now it's much more outward. So again, I think I am, probably more introverted, and my processing is my own. I've learned how to compartmentalize. I think I was one of the best at compartmentalizing. But this process, this work, is all about connection. And so I've had to stretch myself to get into that space of really not only connecting with one another, but taking what I used to think was private, my private life, and I'm still a little, I'm not on.
Not anymore.
Right.
It's here.
But that was growth for me to be able to share in that way. But I feel even more strongly connected to people because of that. And now we have something we can talk about, and I can open up.
That's right. It feels like sometimes people get stuck in a kind of a group think or a politic think, and they can't follow their own hearts. And it feels like when people can see that, oh, there are people out there who want to heal.
Yeah.
I might be in a red state or a blue state, but I feel like I want to do this. It feels like you're creating a model for folks.
It is definitely a model. It's a model that works. We actually have in the book tools, and I think the book itself is a tool, but it's conversation guides and ways to start these conversations and how to make sure that you're creating safety and a space for safety. And, agreements or touchstones that you want to agree upon in order to create that safety. And when that's done, it just changes the dynamic, and it creates a space where people can connect with one another.
I fully expect every single person in this audience and online to buy the book. But before they buy the book, is there a first step, like in the real world, that folks can take tomorrow or this week to begin that process?
It's just as simple as I did earlier today. Begin to have a conversation with someone that you may not know. And it's, just in casual conversation, just begin asking questions with someone and leaning in around difference. One of my favorite touchstone, and there's this kind of what we call operating agreements that we start at the beginning of our healing process. And one that I like the best is the one that says, turn to wonder. When someone says something that you totally disagree with, instead of getting ready for your debate and coming up with your 5 reasons why they're wrong, the first response is, I wonder how they got to that point of view. I wonder what is that story to get. And so shifting your response from your immediate reaction, your gut reaction, to a wonder. And tell me more. Tell me why you say that. And, just those simple questions that opens up space for conversation as opposed to shut it down. And I think that's the journey that we can all lean into.
And creating those connections, points to the most important word, well, maybe the second most important word in the title is we.
Yes.
We. How do you get folks to see this work as a collective kind of work?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter around, our shared fate. At the end of the day, this work is for all of us, and it is what all of us inherit in this space and in this nation, in the world, and how much better it could be if we were all connected and could work together and have empathy for one another and support one another in their journey to grow. And, it is a we thing. Unfortunately, no matter what you believe, it is a we. It is our shared fate in our nation and world that we will live in. Our generations will inherit this. It's about us. It's about future generations. It's about the children and families that we were structured to support. And Mr. Kellogg would always say, the greatest good for the greatest many. How do you create a space so that everyone thrives?
And the equality is good for all of us.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean you're taking something from someone.
Yeah.
We all benefit.
Oh, and that's another part of the book, the whole zero-sum game mentality. But yes, when we think about economic opportunities, we know that if we were to really open up opportunities for everyone and all of our human capital to fully participate in our economy, we could create over $8 trillion in GDP by 2050. So this is about all of our growth and prosperity, and it starts with understanding where we all fit in this space.
If you had some sort of magic, time machine, and think back to little LaJune and little Jennifer, how would they feel about this book?
Yeah. I'm telling you, little LaJune is...
Can she believe it?
She believes it now. But the interesting thing about little LaJune is she had these 9 siblings and 2 loving parents who, all of which held her accountable very rigidly. And I say I grew up with 11 parents because even the younger sister, every last one of them, it was the mirror in your face. And as some people say within my space, I'm also very direct. And I got that from my family because we didn't have time to waste. We had to get things done. If you weren't doing it, you were told you weren't doing it, and you needed to get in line. I still get calls from my family now. If they feel I'm off, they don't care. It's like, but there was
you're
something.
I'm grown now.
Oh yeah, they don't care. They're like, I don't care who you are. You said you were going to be here on Saturday, and you weren't there. So that level of accountability and truth telling, again, is part of what healing is all about. And getting into that space where that is how you walk, I think, is part of this journey.
Now, June, I hate to put you on the spot, but would you mind reading a little something for us?
Okay.
A little something in there. Yeah.
So I'm going to read a poem that's in the back of the book. And this poem, I was taught how to write this poem in New Mexico. And the name of the poem is called I Am From. And in New Mexico, we were taught that as part of the healing journey, this is the way you introduce yourself. And there's a format to writing I Am From poems. So I wrote this poem as part of that process. So I'll read it now. I Am From by June Montgomery Tabron. I am from the D, from the Motown sound and the big fancy cars. Diamond in the back, sunroof top, digging the scene with the gangster lean. I am from the big white house on Cadillac Boulevard, where there was much laughter and many visitors. I am from the honeysuckle trees and beautiful lawns, where neighbors competed with one another to grow the greenest grass. I am from singing and dancing and listening to music, from 10 children and 2 loving parents, from playing school, family chores, and watching Soul Train on Saturday. I am from do as you are told, and do unto others as you would wish them to do unto you, with a reminder that it's all about love. I am from Detroit, Michigan, by way of Clarksdale, Mississippi, from fried chicken and banana pudding, from my dad, Herbert Montgomery, who knew that opportunities awaited in the North. where he landed employment at Chrysler Corporation and worked there for 25 years. I am from family dinners at Christmas time that appeared to look very similar year after year as you flip through the family photo albums. And I am from the pictures that I have now added of my husband and 4 children as we create holiday traditions for the future.
Wow. That's good. Thank you very much. You know, I seriously mean, I feel like we're just getting started, but we don't have all night. So we're going to turn to a few questions from the audience. If you can, just, yeah, right here.
I'm so grateful that I joined you all tonight. I didn't realize I was coming to church.
Amen.
This has been a spiritual experience. I'm so grateful to hear more about the book. My question is really simple. It's related to how much of you all's framework has been borrowed from, if at all, from the work that Desmond Tutu did and Nelson Mandela did, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee.
Yes, yes.
In South Africa.
A lot of it, and it was part of our journey. When we were designing our Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation work, we first went to our grantees. And as I mentioned earlier, there are indigenous practices that really undergird this work. But we also researched every reconciliation body of work that had happened around the world. Canada, South Africa. We looked everywhere. Australia, what happened there. And we wanted to steep this work in all of those values and principles. So yes, it's very much an outgrowth of all of that knowledge and learning to be able to think about then how do you take all that and drive it into community. And the work was about really distilling it down to how do we want our communities to foster growth and prosperity for everyone in the community.
Excellent. Right here. And after you ask your question, I'll repeat it so they can hear you online. Yes, sir. You right here?
Yep.
The turquoise sleeves.
Hi.
Tough question. Very recently, our president made a statement against DEI and made everybody want to move against it. How do you comment with something like that?
So the question was, how do you combat, a message from the highest point in government, rejecting D&I and attacking D&I?
Yeah, I have several thoughts. But the first thought is, when we talk about an empathy gap, I think that's a reflection of an empathy gap, a lack of understanding, a lack of even framing. And, personally, I believe that DEI isn't a program. DEI is a consciousness. And that's not going away. You can't mandate away principles and practices. And I know in the business community, as these companies compete for talent and compete for the best and the brightest, that they're not going to all of a sudden stop, because that's how our economy continues to churn and grow. So if you think about it as a program, which it isn't and never has been, maybe that's possible to stop, but the consciousness and the understanding of how to really grow talent and our human capacity, that's going to stay.
Excellent.
Hi, June. I'm the Sambi Ricketts from the Kellogg Foundation. So I just want to say thank you first for sharing the book.
Nice to meet you.
My question is, just thinking about your leadership at the Kellogg Foundation, how do you think the field of philanthropy and the social sector needs to lead in this moment?
Yeah, I really do think that, again, this has to be grounded in collaboration and partnerships and conversations and healing. And we need to come together right now. There's something about solidarity in this work and unity, and it's needed very deeply, regardless of what your programming priorities may be. I think this is a moment where, from a sector perspective, we can make sure that our social fabric in our nation and the world remains. That's what we've been sanctioned to do. We have to step up and step into that space as a collective. So it's about all of us.
Right here.
Hi, June.
Hello.
I started reading your book. I'm still working my way through it. But I wanted to first of all thank you for being here to share your story with us.
Thank you.
One of the, or a few of the anecdotes that I found most compelling, especially given, our current time period, were the ones where you talked about engaging in healing conversations or healing circles with people who you then agreed to disagree with at the end of the conversation, and then maybe you came back and spoke with them again.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask a little bit more about how, in that kind of space, how do you navigate agreeing to disagree with somebody in very heated and sometimes painful conversations?
Yes. And again, I say this is the most difficult part of the journey. This is real work, and it's not all fluffy. But one of the stories that I share in the book is, how the police chief in Battle Creek became what I would say is a very a colleague of mine. But it started with confrontation with this police chief. He and I disagreed on why a police car and a policeman followed my husband and I home in our new neighborhood, where we're the only black family in the neighborhood. So that's how we met, with him and I trying to have this conversation about why we were followed home, and he basically was telling me we should have done something about that, So we disagreed, and actually when the conversation ended, we disagreed. And we disagreed on many things, but where we agreed on first was we're doing similar work. He's trying to save the community in his mind, and so am I. And so we bonded around that work, and eventually he invited me to go to a very rambunctious police meeting in New York City with PERF, which was interesting. And then I invited him to do some healing work within the Battle Creek community with his police force. And both those things happened, and we continued to dialogue, and it wasn't perfect. It's not like we always agree, but we have a way to work together now, and we can work on common goals that we want for our community. And that's how some of these things happen. You don't have to, it's not always a love fest, but it is a place for connecting enough to know how you can work together, and that's the goal.
Excellent. In the far back.
Mr. Lee, you work in media, and also yesterday Axios reported that BuzzFeed is shifting their business model to more of a social platform, and according to their CEO, Joe Montgomery, it's being built specifically to spread joy and enable playful, creative expression. An anecdote to what they're talking about is SNARK, or content that stands for stakes, novelty, anger, fear, retention. My question, and I would love an answer from both of you too, how do you see the role of media and even individual reporters in promoting this type of thing?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'll speak to, I think baked into the kind of work that I've committed my life to, and so many of my colleagues have, is shining light in dark spaces, and that we can't run from the truth. And I think part of the healing is for us to create a space for people to fully understand the machinery in which we exist, especially those that usher us from life to death, right? Because every single day, communities, families are being ground up by these machines. And for me, the answer is that there's nothing wrong with us, and I've said it time and again, but the systems around us. And so I don't know if there's a signing up for a journalist to be part of this healing movement, but I think baked into what we do, it's our humanity, right? And comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I would add is how are we bringing more balance to narrative? And one of the areas of our work is about narrative change and how you create that narrative. And television and media is a tool as well. And that tool has been used to create narrative, positive or negative. And I think, we can lean into that tool to show where this work is happening. Because what we've been showing is the division, but what I see on the ground is where this work is happening and where there are movements of people healing and connecting all across the nation and the world right now. And how does that narrative get relayed in a way that people can consume it and join that movement? So, I would hope that the media could be a partner in the sharing the narratives of how this could work for all of us.
And there are good things happening. Again, for me, I think I've always been taken aback at how ignorant people are to the realities of the way some of us live in this country. So my effort has always been to show people that part of it. So hopefully we can heal it. But there are people across the country every single day feeding folks who don't have food,
Yes.
educating folks who don't have access to quality education. And so there are beautiful, important things happening. Mm-hmm. Our humanity is shining bright all over the country, but we often don't see it because the other forms of violence are just so bloody.
Exactly.
I think we have time for one or two more. If we have, right here, yes. That's you. I'm sorry, I can't see up with the lights.
Yeah, the lights are kind of bright.
Hello. Network 2014 in New Orleans.
All right.
And I just wanted to say to you, as a leader that your institution has invested in the communities that we're in, what are some words of encouragement and wisdom that you can give to leaders who are exhausted?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And taking the tools that you've been able to learn and build through investment. Leaders need individual investment in them, but what are some words that you liked that you want us to keep going?
The first thing is get some rest. And actually, this is words that I have to give myself sometimes because I know what that frustration feels like, and I know, what the grind is in this work. But I also know for my own well-being that you also have to take time and do that self-care part. And we almost, if you're like me, you almost feel guilty when you do that. But I go back to that, put your own seatbelt on first so you can care and work with others. Do your oxygen mask first. And this work requires, grit and resilience and longevity. And so part of that is the self-care part, which we're really trying to build into our practices within the foundation. And I think no matter what type of organization you are, you can think about what that practice could look like in your organization and for yourself, but it's critical.
We have one more. You ready, brother?
Hello, June. I'd like to bring this back to the work that we do and you do around children and families. And I love the question she asked, how do we continue to be strong in this work? Because we don't do it for ourselves, for our children and our grandchildren. And I know this book is written for adults, but could you speak to how we can begin to think about helping children who are traumatized and who need to heal as well?
Yeah. Thank you for that question because there's a children's book as well. And there it is right there. We actually launched both the adult book and the children's book. And the children's book is called Our Differences Make Us Stronger. And it was written, again, from my own story. And again, as I described, I didn't quite understand what was happening as my neighborhood was changing. And so we wrote it in a way where young people can begin to embrace differences. And we gave them tools on how to actually have these conversations at a very, very early age so that we're not uncomfortable as adults doing it. We grow up doing it, and it becomes just part of how we connect with one another. So I think it's very important for our young people to begin to embrace our humanity and all the fabric of our humanity as early as possible. So yes, the children's book I love because it kind of is my story on that journey, and I think every child could be able to share in that story.
Well, June, I want to thank you for this very important, necessary book at this time. Thank you, and congratulations. This is the first launch event for the book, so
Thank you.
congratulations. I want to thank all of you again for being here. Everyone online, we can't see you, but we can see you. So thank you for being here. And you can get your book signed right after this. So thank you again, y'all.
Thank you.